So how has how have your own priorities changed when it comes to health, 10 years ago versus today? You were taking a whole bunch of anabolics and stuff. Now, what does that look like compared to where you were at 10 years ago?
So 10 years ago, I would have been trying to get as jacked as humanly possible and very little regard for, or at least at the time, an increasing awareness around the potential risks, but essentially disregarding them because of, I suppose, at a young age, you're pretty resilient and you get away with a lot of stuff, but also just not being aware of the, risk, the gravity of the risks. Because at the time, social media, because it wasn't as big as it is now, there was not as much reporting of people dying at a young age too from using this stuff. So literally 10 years ago, you would hear, this was a common phrase, where are the bodies? And people would talk about how there's no evidence that steroids are killing people, when the reality is it's insidiously like shortening your life dramatically. And when you die, you could argue that you had, a heart condition, genetically predisposed or whatever, or it was this or it was that. But ultimately, like, it's not normal, even if you're genetically predisposed to be dying, typically at like 27 years old, because you had unregulated high blood pressure for, 6+ years, or, your heart's twice the size it should be or something. So at the time, though, there was very little info on that. So I was just kind of like pushing stuff as hard as I wanted and within reason, because I also was starting to lose my hair too, which I didn't like at the time. And I think that kind of started my foray into pulling back on things a little bit, which fortunately was also kind of like, I suppose, got me quicker to the point of being aware of the health implications, because I would have otherwise probably continued to push it had I not had any side effects at all.
Do you believe that there's an anabolic stack that you can take in your 30s, 40s consistently where you're not burning the candle out? Like you mentioned in other podcasts, I've heard you talk about how you still do TRT, some of that stuff. Do you think that now today, is that just pushing yourself to a kind of a baseline, or are you still trying to enhance your body or do anything? Like, are you basically off everything now?
No, so I'm on a physiologic replacement amount, which can be a bit of a cop-out for optimization for some people, because it's like almost TRT is the new like fake natty for some people, essentially. Because it's like, oh, I'm not actually doing anything. But in reality, the baseline state you've imposed is exogenous, as in externally administered, and not representative of what you could sustain with natural function, because it's not going to perpetually stay at that level, because you have a natural diurnal rhythm when you pulse out testosterone. It's not like it just stays at the exact level that you've administered. It, pushes out and pulses, and it will dip as well if you have bad sleep, if you drink, if you have poor diet or whatever. Like, you will see the reflection of that in the testosterone levels going up and down. And even if you were perfect on everything, they don't just stay at the same level. Whereas somebody who's injecting, it will just stay at that level. And they have, despite on paper the same testosterone, they will have more muscle and performance than the same alternative scenario with their natural testosterone level at that level.
So you'd say that really, though, if you're just doing TRT and you're maintaining a baseline, you're not burning the candle. But as soon as you start adding anabolics to that, ranging from Anavar to the, the much more intense stuff, there's a cost to everything. Is that correct?
Yeah, but there is definitely, like, people are still going to die at some age, regardless if they're natural or enhanced. And to say that you could take TRT generally with no consequence would be very misleading, in my opinion, because there's a spectrum of what TRT is. Again, like I had mentioned, with your testosterone range naturally on paper, a guy who has 1100 total testosterone with synthetic administration, they could argue I'm just on TRT because it's physiologic, versus if they were at 600 or something, it's also TRT because it's physiologic. If I'm at 400, it's also like, it's all TRT within that range, essentially, by traditional standards. But it doesn't mean that you can sustain that high normal level and not have any consequence guaranteed just because it's normal on paper. Because again, it's a sustained level perpetually. It doesn't dip. There's some risks that I wouldn't say are guaranteed to make it dangerous, but there's certainly a case to be made where it's not just TRT equals safe. And all the literature we have is using like androgel and pushing your test up like 300 from 200 to like 500 or something. It's not using injectable testosterone to maintain 1,000 nanograms for your entire life. Like there's no literature on that.